All right, let's kick off another deep dive. Today we're tackling some really cool research on human character.
Okay.
And get this, it might surprise you to hear that it's not as simple as, good or bad.
Right.
Like we often tend to think, right?
Yeah.
So to really get into this, we'll be looking at some audio excerpts from Character, Surprising Truths About Us,
Oh, cool.
which is a book by David DeSteno and Piercarlo Valdez.
Sounds interesting.
And in the book, one of the most interesting points they make is this idea that character isn't actually, fixed.
Oh, okay.
It's not like you're born with good character or bad character, but instead it's constantly being shaped by this kind of tug of war happening inside us all the time.
Makes sense.
Between our long-term interests, what we want for the future, and our short-term impulses.
Right.
Like what we want right now.
Like instant gratification.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The instant gratification.
Apparently.
So they actually give these competing forces kind of like catchy names.
That's fun.
To help us understand them.
Yeah.
They call them the inner ant, which is all about planning for the future, like an ant, always working and preparing.
I like that.
And then there's the inner grasshopper, which is all about living in the moment and just
having fun,
wanting fun and pleasure and
right.
all the good stuff right now.
Makes sense.
So are you saying then
Yeah.
that someone we might label as having good character is just someone whose inner ant is winning out more often?
Well, it's not quite that simple.
Okay.
But the analogy, I think it really helps illustrate the idea that character is actually really dynamic.
It's not just
not set in stone.
Static thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So how do DeSteno and Valdez explain this?
Well, they use a really good example. It's the example of former Governor Mark Sanford.
Oh, interesting.
Do you remember him?
I think so, vaguely.
So he was this politician who was known for having this really strong moral stance. He even slipped on a futon in his office to avoid spending taxpayer money on fancy hotels or whatever.
Oh, right. Very principled.
Exactly. But then he gets caught having an affair.
Oh, wow.
Which obviously threw everyone for a loop.
Yeah, that's quite a contradiction.
It really is.
Yeah.
And, it makes us question that whole thing we were talking about earlier, that tendency we have to put people in these neat little boxes.
Right.
Good or bad.
Good or bad.
Yeah, because clearly it's more complicated than that.
Yeah, it really is a powerful example because it makes you stop and think about how we judge other people.
Exactly.
And maybe even more importantly, how we judge ourselves. It's so easy to point the finger when somebody else does something we think is wrong.
Totally.
But what about when we mess up?
Right.
What about those times when our own inner grasshopper gets the upper hand?
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Because there's actually research showing that we are way more forgiving
of
our own moral missteps than we are of other people's.
You're kidding. Are you serious?
Yeah, it's true.
So, we have a blind spot when it comes to our own hypocrisy.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's wild.
So DeSteno and Valdez described this experiment where participants had to choose between an easy task and a hard task.
Okay.
And they could either flip a coin to decide fairly.
To be fair.
Yeah, or they could just pick the easy one.
Right.
And the results showed that the people who chose the easy way they saw their actions as way less immoral than when someone else made the same choice.
So basically, we're all capable of being hypocrites.
Pretty much.
Even if we think we have.
Strong
morals.
Yeah, exactly.
This is blowing my mind.
Right.
I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah.
But it's still kind of shocking to hear.
Yeah.
I'm starting to rethink how quickly I judge other people now.
I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, maybe I should be asking myself why someone acted the way they did.
Exactly.
Instead of just jumping to conclusions.
Yeah, I think that's a great takeaway.
You know about their character.
Yeah.
Because, like you were saying,
yeah,
there are probably a lot of hidden factors that we're just not aware of.
Exactly. And as we go deeper into this research, you'll see that there are tons of things that can affect our choices. Often without us even realizing it.
This is what I love about these deep dives.
Yeah.
We think we're in control, but then we learn all this stuff. about how our brains work. And you realize maybe we're not as in control.
Yeah, maybe not.
As we think we are.
Yeah, it's a little unsettling, but...
A little bit, yeah.
Also kind of cool, right?
Yeah, I'm definitely ready to learn more.
Well, good, because next we're going to be looking at the power of context and emotions.
Ooh, all right. I'm ready for it.
It's going to be good.
Let's do it.
Okay.
Okay, so we've talked about how character isn't really fixed.
Right.
And how, like, we tend to be tougher on others than on ourselves when it comes to morality. But how do our surroundings or even our mood, like, in the moment, play into all of this?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it turns out, like, even totally unrelated emotions can have a huge impact on how we make moral judgments.
Okay.
Like DeSteno and Valdez, they talk about this experiment.
Yeah.
Where they use the classic trolley problem.
Oh, I've heard of that one, yeah.
Yeah, it's that ethical dilemma where you have to decide if you should sacrifice one person to save 5 others.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
Right. It's a real head scratcher.
Yeah, definitely.
So in their experiment, they had some participants watch a funny video clip.
Oh, interesting.
Right before they were asked about the trolley problem.
So they were in a good mood then?
Exactly. They were feeling happy.
I wonder if that, like, actually affected their decision.
It totally did.
No way. Really?
Yeah. The people who watched the funny video, they were like 3 times more likely to think that pushing someone onto the tracks to save the others
oh my God.
was morally okay.
That's so wild. So it's almost like having a good laugh made the idea of sacrificing someone, like, less horrible?
It seems that way.
You'd think moral judgments would be more, like, rational.
You would think so.
You know?
You'd think they'd be based on logic.
Right. Not just, like, how you're feeling at that moment.
But this study, it shows how powerful emotions can be.
Yeah.
Like, they can influence even our biggest decisions.
Wow. That's crazy.
And it's not just humor that can do this.
Okay.
They also found that feeling disgusted can mess with our moral judgments, too.
Disgust. Really? I don't see how that, like, connects to morality.
Right. It doesn't seem related at first.
Yeah.
But they did this study
Okay.
where people made moral judgments in different settings.
Okay.
Some were in a regular clean room, and others were in a room that was, like, purposely messy with stuff like dirty tissues and stained chairs.
Ew. I'm already feeling grossed out just imagining that.
Right. It's kind of gross.
Yeah.
But that was the point.
Okay.
And guess what? The participants in the messy room, they judged a bunch of moral transgressions as way worse than those in the clean room.
So just being in that disgusting environment
Yeah, exactly.
made them harsher in their judgments.
It seems that feeling disgusted, like even if it's totally unrelated, just spills over into our judgment.
That's wild. It's like our brains are taking a shortcut.
Right. Like a mental shortcut.
Yeah, like if we're feeling icky about one thing, we're more likely to see everything negatively.
Exactly.
Okay, that's kind of disturbing to think about.
It is a little bit.
That something so random can influence our moral compass so much.
Yeah, and it gets even more concerning.
Okay, how so?
When you think about how this tendency can be used against us.
Ooh, okay.
DeSteno and Valdez mentioned this study where they found that just washing your hands.
Really? Just washing your hands?
Yeah. Just that it actually reduced feelings of guilt.
Wow.
And made people less likely to help someone in need.
So hold on. Are you saying that physically cleaning ourselves made people feel morally clean too?
Yeah, kind of like their moral slate had been wiped clean.
That's so bizarre. It's like our actions are tricking our minds.
It really is. It shows how much our actions can influence our thoughts and feelings.
Yeah, and not always in ways we expect.
Definitely.
Okay, this is making me think about all the subtle ways our emotions might be, like, secretly manipulating our choices.
Right. It's kind of freaky when you think about it.
Yeah, totally. What about love and lust, then? Those are strong emotions. I bet they play a big role in all this.
Absolutely, and that's where things get even trickier.
Okay, why is that?
Because those emotions are just so powerful, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
DeSteno and Valdez actually say that both lust and love, while they're often seen as, like, opposites, they both serve important evolutionary purposes.
Oh, that's interesting. I can see how love would be beneficial from an evolutionary standpoint.
Yeah, like for survival.
Yeah, but lust, that doesn't seem as helpful.
Well, think about it from a purely biological perspective.
Okay.
Lust is all about passing on your genes.
Okay.
It's driven by those physical cues that signal good health and fertility.
Right.
So even though it might lead to some not-so-great choices sometimes.
Like impulsive decisions.
Exactly. But in the grand scheme of things, it helps ensure that the species keeps going.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
So it's like lust is the voice of the inner grasshopper, urging us to, go out there and reproduce.
Okay, spread those genes.
Exactly. While love is more like the inner ant,
right,
encouraging us to settle down.
Yeah, build a nest.
And raise a family.
That's a good analogy.
Right.
Like, we're programmed to look for both the excitement and the stability.
Exactly. The sizzle and the substance.
But love isn't always easy, right?
Definitely not.
What about jealousy? Doesn't that, throw things off?
Jealousy is a perfect example.
Yeah.
Of an emotion that can really mess things up.
Yeah.
Even though it also has, evolutionary roots.
Really? How so? Jealousy seems like it's always a bad thing.
Well, from an evolutionary perspective, jealousy was a way of protecting relationships and making sure that partners stayed committed.
Okay, so like a defense mechanism.
Exactly. It's like an alarm system in your brain that goes off when you sense a threat to the bond.
So basically, it's a primal instinct
Right.
that helped our ancestors secure mates and ensure their kids survived.
Exactly. But in today's world,
it
seems like jealousy often causes more problems than it solves.
Right. It can get out of control.
For sure.
And lead to all sorts of drama.
DeSteno and Valdez actually talk about some pretty extreme examples.
Oh, what kind of examples?
Like the case of Lisa Nowak, the astronaut.
Oh, yeah, I remember hearing about that.
Yeah, she drove across the country to confront a romantic rival.
Wow.
Armed with pepper spray and a BB gun.
That's insane. I can't believe jealousy could drive someone to do that.
It's a reminder of how intense emotions can be.
Yeah.
Especially when they tap into our insecurities.
Right, our deepest fears.
Exactly, even in less dramatic cases. Jealousy can still have a big impact on us.
Like those little pangs of jealousy we all feel sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. Those can still influence how we act.
It's not just about those crazy headline-grabbing stories.
Right. It affects us on a smaller scale, too.
So jealousy is tied to our self-esteem, then?
Absolutely. When we feel insecure in a relationship, it can really damage how we feel about ourselves.
It's like a vicious cycle, then.
Yeah, the more insecure we feel, the more jealous we become.
Right.
And then that further erodes our self-esteem.
So we've seen how context and emotions and even our biology can shape our character and choices.
That's a lot to take in.
It is. But knowing all this, is there anything we can do to navigate all these complex forces and make better decisions?
That's the million-dollar question.
So we've learned a lot about how our emotions and biology can really influence our decisions.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
But now I'm wondering, knowing all this, is there anything we can do to manage these hidden influences and make choices that are more in line with, our values and goals?
Well, DeSteno and Valdez actually offer some strategies.
Okay.
For basically strengthening our inner ant.
Okay, yeah.
Helping it win out more often.
Right, so we can resist those tempting impulses.
Exactly.
What kind of strategies?
One of the most effective ones is this idea of pre-commitment.
Pre-commitment. I haven't heard of that.
It's kind of like, remember Odysseus, who tied himself to the mast?
Right, right.
So he wouldn't be tempted by the sirens?
Okay, I get it.
Yeah, it's about anticipating those situations where you might be tempted to do something you'll regret.
Yeah.
And then setting up those safeguards.
So you don't even have to rely on willpower in the moment.
Exactly. You're basically removing the temptation.
I like that. Outsmarting the inner grasshopper before it can even tempt you.
Right.
Do you have any real-world examples of how this could work?
So let's say, you tend to overspend when you're stressed.
Okay. Yeah, that's me.
So you could pre-commit by leaving your credit cards at home.
Oh, that's smart.
When you go shopping.
Yeah.
Or setting a super strict budget and really sticking to it.
So you're removing the possibility of even being tempted.
Exactly.
We've also talked a bit about pride.
Right.
And how it can be both, positive and negative.
Yeah, it's a tricky one.
How does pride fit into all of this?
Well, DeSteno and Valdez actually argue that pride, even though we often see it as a bad thing, can actually be a really powerful motivator.
Oh, that's interesting.
It can push us to develop new skills and persevere through challenges.
And contribute to society in positive ways.
Exactly. It's not just about arrogance and ego.
So there's a good side to pride, too.
Yeah, definitely.
What's an example of that?
They describe this experiment.
Okay.
Where they simply told participants that they did really well on a visual spatial task. And just that simple feedback made them feel proud.
Interesting.
And more likely to keep going with a harder task later on.
So even just feeling proud of something small can boost our motivation to achieve bigger things.
Exactly. It's like pride fuels our inner ant.
That makes sense.
But of course, there's a flip side.
Right. Too much pride can be a bad thing.
When pride turns into hubris.
Right. That excessive kind of pride.
Yeah, like thinking you're better than everyone else.
Yeah, like thinking you're better than everyone else.
How can we make sure we don't cross that line?
DeSteno and Valdez use the example of Tom Cruise.
Okay.
To show how pride can morph into hubris. They argue that his early drive, which was probably fueled by pride in his craft, seemed to change as he became more and more successful.
So success can sometimes go to our heads.
It can, if we're not careful.
It's important to stay humble then.
Yeah, especially when we achieve big things.
And this is especially relevant when we think about leaders, right?
Exactly. DeSteno and Valdez talk about how George W. Bush's pride, especially during the Iraq War, really hurt his popularity.
So finding that balance between pride and humility is key.
Yeah, for everyone, not just leaders.
So what's the main takeaway for our listeners today?
Well, I think the most important thing is self-awareness.
Okay.
Pay attention to those gut feelings, those little emotional cues that drive our decisions.
So we need to become like experts on our own minds.
Exactly.
And we shouldn't be afraid to question our assumptions.
Right. What might seem like a clear moral decision might actually be influenced by unconscious biases or emotions.
So it's all about being mindful and introspective and maybe a little less judgmental of ourselves and others.
Exactly.
And don't forget about humility.
Right. Remember, we're all capable of good and bad.
It's the choices we make that shape our character.
I think that's a great way to put it.
This deep dive has given me a lot to think about.
Me too.
Yeah. And I hope it's done the same for our listeners.
I hope so.
If you want to learn more,
definitely
check out Character: Surprising Truths About Us.
A great book.
By David DeSteno and Piercarlo Valdez.
You won't regret it.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into human character.
Thanks for having me.
Until next time, keep exploring.